Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
So, let's dive right in. Based on Noam Chomsky's analysis, if you really want to understand U.S. foreign policy, you have to stop seeing it as just a series of mistakes or random events. Instead, you need to see it as a highly successful system, a machine, really, designed for one core purpose: to make the world serve the needs of the U.S. economy.
You know, this system wasn't some vague idea. It actually had a name. Planners back during World War II called it the Grand Area. And this was a crystal-clear blueprint for the post-war world. It basically assigned a very specific economic job to every single region of the globe, all to benefit the United States. And the scope of this Grand Area was, well, it was huge. It designated the industrial centers of Germany and Japan as essentially workshops operating under U.S. control. Meanwhile, the so-called Third World was given a very different role: to be a source of raw materials and a market for all the goods the West was producing.
Okay, so if that's the structure, what's the core incentive? What's the real driver here? It's not about spreading democracy or human rights. According to the system's own planners, the primary goal was to create and then maintain a position of disparity, which is a fancy way of saying a massive, intentional economic imbalance between the U.S. and everyone else.
To really get a sense of this imbalance, get this. Right after World War II, the United States had just about 6% of the world's population, but controlled half of its wealth. Half. This single fact is absolutely crucial for understanding the policy decisions that came next.
And you know, internal documents from that time are surprisingly frank about this. In a 1948 memo, a top State Department planner, George Kennan, said that the real task was to maintain this position of disparity. He even explicitly warned that idealistic slogans, about democracy and human rights, would only get in the way.
So, if the system's whole goal is to keep this massive imbalance in place, what's the biggest threat to it? How does it protect itself?
Well, the greatest danger isn't some military invasion. It's what planners call the threat of a good example. This is the fear that some small country somewhere might successfully develop its economy for the benefit of its own people. And why is that so dangerous? Because planners see it as a virus that could infect a whole region, causing other countries to get similar ideas.
And there's a clear, repeatable playbook for neutralizing this so-called virus. First, a nation tries to go its own way. Second, it gets labeled a rotten apple that could spoil the whole barrel. And third, it's targeted, with everything from economic warfare to military force. This whole process, it reveals the true logic behind the domino theory. It was never really about a fear of conquest, but a fear of a good example spreading.
And this isn't just a theory. The source material points to a consistent historical pattern. Whether we're talking about democratic capitalism in Guatemala or a mild social revolution in tiny Grenada, any country that tried to chart its own course and prioritize its own people was targeted. In fact, the weaker and poorer the country, the more dangerous the example was considered.
So how do you get the public to support all this? Well, a key strategy is to use language as a kind of mask. The system takes these familiar words we all use and completely inverts their meaning to hide its true intentions.
Let's take democracy. We think of it as a government that's responsive to its people. But in this analysis, a country is only considered democratic if it serves corporate and foreign investment interests. A government that actually responds to its own population's needs is often seen as a threat that has to be undermined.
It's the same thing with a word like stability. To the public, it means peace and social order, but in policy documents, it means a secure, predictable climate for elite business interests. And this kind of stability can, and often does, require the violent repression of the general population to make it happen. So, for the system to operate abroad, it first has to manage how things are perceived at home. It has to get either active support or, at the very least, just passive acceptance from its own people.
So how is this done? The primary method is to create a climate of fear. By constantly focusing the public's attention on some terrifying enemy out there, you can justify almost any action, no matter how aggressive it is.
And this external enemy has conveniently shifted over time. For decades, it was the Soviet Union. When that threat faded, the narrative seamlessly pivoted to new villains: third world nationalists, then drug traffickers, then international terrorists. Each one was demonized in turn to manufacture consent for the next intervention.
And this brings us right to the heart of the matter, the crisis in perception. It's the massive gap between what the public is told is happening and how the system is actually and successfully operating.
This really reveals the core disconnect. The public is told the goal is to build democracy. When the outcome is a devastated country, it's framed as a policy failure. But from the system's point of view, the mission was a success. The virus of a good example was destroyed, and the threat was neutralized. Goal achieved.
The real crisis in perception, then, isn't that the system is constantly failing. It's that we are taught to see its greatest successes as failures. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis in perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.